Chagiga Daf Yud Tes continues the Gemara's discussion of the halachos of Tumah and Tahara. Here we'll be discussing the halacha of Tevila and the proper way to immerse in water in order to remove Tumah that one has. As we have seen, there are different levels of susceptibility to Tumah depending on how much Kedusha something has. The Gemara in its beginning half of the Daf will be discussing how those levels apply to Tevila, to taking the Tumah off. Specifically, the Gemara wants to know about having Kavana, having in mind what you want your Tevila to work for. We've already seen that you have to have in mind that you want your Tevila to work for the level of Tumah which you want it to work for. If you had in mind for a lower level, it doesn't work for a higher level. First question here is, do you have to have anything in mind for Tevila for Chulin? Just for the sake of handling Chulin things which have no Kedusha at all, do you have to have in mind that your Tevila should allow you to do that, it should take off Tumah to be able to do that? Or can you just do Tevila without Kavanah at all? The Gemara will bring two proofs. We'll bring two sources first, that you do not have to have anything in mind, two questions on it which we'll answer, and then another source. Then the Gemara will go deeper into the halachos of Tevila. The Gemara will discuss what is a kosher amount of mikvah. Can you connect two different parts of water and consider them to be a good Tevila or not? At the end of the Daf, the Gemara will refer back to our Mishnah and discuss whether there's a difference between Chulin and Meiser in the Mishnah and who our Mishnah holds like. So let's begin the Daf. So we've seen that in order for Tevila to work, to allow you to touch or eat things which have Kedusha, you have to have in mind that you want this to be a Tevila. If you just rinse yourself off in water without having understanding or in mind that it's a Tevila, it doesn't count. The first question is, does that work for Chulin? Can you do Tevila without intending for it to be a Tevila? Meaning, if you go into water without intending for it to be a Tevila, does it work anyway for Chulin? So the Gemara is going to bring two sources that it does work. You do not have to have Kavana for Tevila to work for the sake of Chulin. So the Gemara's first source is from a Mishnah, which says that if somebody has a wave jump out of the ocean, and it detaches from the ocean, so it's no longer connected to the ocean, and that wave has 40 sa of water in it, so he has 40 sa of water, and it falls on him, or on kalim, or on objects which require Tevila. So the halacha is that it works. This counts as a kosher Tevila. Now, do you think this case is talking about where somebody had in mind for this to be a Tevila, or it just jumped on him and he didn't have anything in mind? So the Gemara says at first, well, obviously he did not have anything in mind, because kalim don't have anything in mind. They're inanimate objects, and therefore it should be the same halacha. The people and the kalim in the case should be the same, except one is people and one is kalim, but as far as having in mind should be the same, and therefore both are talking about where you didn't have anything in mind. And therefore, you see clearly that Tevila works even when you do not have in mind for the Tevila to work. Somebody rejects this, and the Gemara says, no, we're actually talking about where you did have in mind for the Tevila to work, and that means that he was sitting on the beach waiting for the wave to come and jump on him, and he had in mind that when it falls on him, then it'll count as a kosher Tevila. The Gemara says, therefore, the kalim also is talking about where he had in mind, that is, he was sitting there and waiting for the wave to fall on the kalim, and he had in mind that Tevila should work for the kalim itself. So the Gemara says, if so what's the chiddush? You have water, 40 sa, goes on a person, he has in mind, what's the question? Of course it works. Versus the chiddush is that a wave that detaches from the ocean works. I have two reasons to think that wouldn't work. First of all, we have a halacha of chardalis. Chardalis is water which is flowing vertically down a mountain or falling like a waterfall. The halacha is that does not count as a mikvah of 40 sa. Even if you have 40 sa that are all connected to each other, it doesn't count because we don't view it as connected if it's flowing vertically. Now, you may think a wave is just like that, or a wave should be easily confusable with that. And if it does like that doesn't work, this shouldn't work either. Now, another problem with a chardalis is that it's moving water, and in rainwater that's moving doesn't count as a mikvah. It has to be collected in one place for it to count as a mikvah. Now, next the Gemara says there's another reason to say that a wave might not work, and that is that the curve of the wave, which is in the air, is no good. You cannot do tefillah in the curve of the wave. The only thing you could do is in the ends of the wave, the tips of the wave, when they're on the ground. So we're talking here where you're doing tefillah in the tips of the wave that's on the ground. You may think, make exera, don't allow tefillah in the tips of the wave which is on the ground, because then a person may do the curve of the wave when it's in the air, and that's not good. It brings a brisa that says you cannot do tefillah in the curve of a wave. Now the reason is because it's in the air. Tefillah has to be in connection to the ground. It can't be floating in the air. You can't have water flying in the air and you're flying in the air and the tefillah happens. That doesn't work. Okay, now the Gemara goes therefore, so we have no source. So the Gemara therefore is looking for its second possible source, as the first one we rejected, that you do not have to have kavanah for tefillah of chulin, for tefillin to work for chulin. The Gemara says the source is from the following Mishnah. It says that if somebody has fruits that fell in the water, and he puts his hand in the water to take the fruits. So what's the halacha of his hands and his fruit? If they were both tamei, if his hands were tamei, do his hands now become tar because he put them in flowing water, in a mikvah or mayan of water? And as far as the fruits, they weren't tummy, we're assuming, but if they weren't huchshar to be makabel tumah, are they huchshar now? The halacha is that fruits never become tummy unless they first got wet in a situation where you were happy about that moisture being on it, called kiyutan, where you are happy about it. Then, once that happens, it's called huchshar to be makabel tumah, and if it touches tumah afterwards, it becomes tumah. The question is, does this count as the fruits getting wet in the way that you wanted it? So, the Gemara says if you just put his hand in the water to take the fruits out, then he did not want the fruits to be in the water, and he didn't want his hands to be in the water. He just put his hands in the water, memela. But his hands become tahar anyway, and this is our proof that tevilah in water is mitaher, takes off tumah, even if you do not intend it to, as far as chulin is concerned. Now the halacha of the fruits there, the Mishnah says, is that they are not huchshar to be makabel tumah because you never wanted them to get wet. Now if when he put it in, he had in mind for his hands to become washed, let's say he had dirt on his hands, then his hands also become tar because he wanted them, because he put them in the water. And the fruits now are huchshar because he was happy that the fruits became wet, because now his hands got clean. So therefore that's called that he was happy about the wetness on the water, and now those fruits have become wet with his desire, and therefore those fruits are now susceptible to tumah. They're huchshar to be makabel tumah. With this source, the Gemara accepts. Now the Gemara has two kashas. So the Gemara has a brisa that says that if somebody does tefillah and he does not have in mind, it doesn't work. So Gemara says, you see that it doesn't work at all. It means it doesn't work even that he can't even handle chulin. So Gemara says, no, when we say it doesn't work, we mean it can't work for anything that has kedusha, from meiser and up. But chulin, it does work for. The Gemara's second kasha, which is actually listed first, is asked by Rabba to Rav Nachman, and it says that if somebody does tefillah for chulin, and he has in mind that the tefillah should work for chulin, he cannot use that tefillah for meiser. That's a higher level. It doesn't work for something that he didn't have in mind. It doesn't work for a higher level which he did not have in mind. So you see that it's only if he had in mind for chulin, though, that it works for chulin. The reason why this case, the tefillah works for chulin and not for meiser, is because he had in mind for chulin. If he wouldn't have had in mind for anything, the implication is it wouldn't work for anything at all. So the Gemara says, no, that's not what we mean to say. We just mean to say that even though he had in mind for chulin, it doesn't work for meiser. The chiddush, what we're trying to learn here, is that kavana, that a tefillah should work for chulin, does not help for meiser. However, you do not need that kavana at all for chulin itself. So now the Gemara says that Rabbah thought that Rav Nachman was just pushing him away, and he didn't really hold that the halacha was that you don't have to have kavana for tefillah to work. So he went out and he found a brisa that says clearly that you do. And the brisa says if somebody did tefillah and he did not have in mind, it doesn't work for meiser, but it does work for chulin. So you see, you don't have to have any kavanah at all for chulin. Explicit brisa. Okay, now the Gemara is going to bring a list of halachos or questions of halachos and ask some kashas on them relating to tevilah. So Gemara has a statement from Rav Elazar. If somebody did tevilah and he came out of the mikvah and he forgot to have any kavanah all along, he didn't have kavanah for anything. So even though he is already out of the mikvah, he can have kavanah now that tevilah should work for something. A statement of Rav Elazar that he can now apply his tevilah, which has just ended, to work for anything he wants. He can say it's for chulin, it's for meiser, it's for truma, whatever he wants. So there's a kash on that. Because the Gemara has a brisa that says that he can only change his kavana from one level to a different level as long as he still has a foot in the water. Once he's out of the water, he can't change his kavana anymore. Gemara says that's not a kasha. That's talking about where he had kavana for one level and now he wants to change to a different level. That's harder than when he never had any kavana at all. He just wants to apply kavana to a tefillah. That's over. Therefore, in that case, he has to still have his foot in the water. If he took his foot out of the water, he's no longer connected to the tefillah. Whatever kavana he had at the time of tefillah sticks. He can't change it afterwards. However, if he didn't have any kavana at all, even afterwards, he can change it and apply. He cannot change it, but he can apply a kavana to that tefillah that was done without kavana. Another one wants to know, who's the one who says that if you have your foot in the water, it's still counted as if the tefillah is happening, and you can still change the kavana? Right, we said that you have to still have a foot in the water in order to be able to change from an existing kavana to a different kavana. Okay, but that means you're telling me that as long as your foot is in the water, you're still considered to be in the water completely, because all the water that's on your body is connected to the mikvah through your foot. Who holds that way? So we say it's Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds that way. Now the Gemara brings a brayso to show that. So this is brought by Rav Pedas, who says you have a mission that says the following case: you have a mikveh that's exactly 40 saw, and two people use it one after the other. So the problem is, the first person took some of the water out with him because he came out wet, and therefore it's now less than 40 saw. It does not have the minimum required amount to be a kosher mikveh. So the second person doesn't work for him. Says the Mishnah, what happens if the first person's foot is still touching the mikveh water when the second person goes in? Do you view the water that's on his body as still being connected to the mikveh and part of the mikveh, and as if it is lower and therefore in the mikveh, and therefore the tefillah works? So Gemara says this is machlokes between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rav Pedas is understanding that machlokes is referring to all cases, or at least to tefillah d'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say it doesn't work. You do not view the water as if it's in the mikvah. Therefore, the mikvah is empty. It's not full, that is. It doesn't have a full amount. And the second person's tefillah is no good, even if the leg of the first one is touching the water. Rav Yehuda, however, says otherwise. Rav Yehuda says, no, it's still considered as if the water that's on the body of the first person is in the mikvah, and therefore the second person's tefillah is kosher. So there you see Rav Yehuda says, as long as a person has a foot in the water, all the water on his body is still considered to be in the mikvah. Now, Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabbi Baravua, say that you have to limit where this machlokes is. And the Gemara has two versions of what he said. One fits with Rav Pedas and one is against Rav Pedas. The first version is that he says the machlokes is in the case of tevilah for a tumah d'Rabbanan, for a rabbinic requirement of tevilah, not even necessarily tumah. Like sometimes the Rabbanan required somebody to go to the mikvah, which is not for tumah, such as if somebody's an onein, was an onein, something along those lines. Somebody who's Mechaser Kippurim, all these things. So for that, this person's foot in the water works to make the water completed to be 40 saw, according to Rabbi Yehuda. However, Tefillah D'Oraisa, there's no argument that it doesn't work. So now, this version of Rav Nachman agrees with Rav Pedas. So Rabbi Yehuda is the only one who could hold this way, because the Chachamim never hold up for this halacha. However, different version of Rav Nachman says that the only machlokes is in a case of Tefillah D'Oraisa for Tumah D'Oraisa. In the case of Tefillah D'Rabbanan, everybody agrees that it would work. They only say that it doesn't work. The only machlokes where the Rabbanan say that it doesn't work is for Tefillah D'Oraisa. If that's the case, that means that the Rabbanan agree to Rav Yehuda that water that's outside the mikvah is considered connected to the mikvah. They say it doesn't work for Tumah D'Oraisa for other reasons, whatever it is. But as far as the halachos of connection, they still are considered connected, and that would not fit with Rav Pedas, who limited that only Rav Yehuda holds this way and not the Chachamim. Another Gemara is a question. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that the water is considered to be connected to the mikvah, does that mean that the water on his body is actual mikvah? Can I do tefillah in that water? I know I view the mikvah water as if all the water on his body is in it. That means I view halachically the water as being lower. The water which is on his body is as if it's in the mikvah, and therefore the mikvah is full. Can I view all the water in the mikvah as if it is up and it is on the guy's head? Right? What would be the case if I took a little tiny needle and I did tefillah in the hair on his head, which is holding a ton of water, so it can be surrounded on all sides by water? Now, it needs to be 40 saw. Is it considered 40 saw because the water that's in the mikvah below is considered to be in the water on his head above as well, or not? So the Gemara says we could bring a proof to this, say that yes, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it is good. You can view lower water as if it's higher, from a case of water flowing down the side of a mountain. Now, water flowing down the side of a mountain is not kosher. It's rainwater that's moving. It's no good, like we said earlier. However, if it collects in holes along the way, there it's not moving in those holes. As long as a hole has 40 saw, it is kosher. So Gemara now talks about a case where you had 3 holes along the slope of a mountain, one above the other on the slope. The middle hole has 40 sa. The upper one and the lower one have only 20 sa. But the stream of water is connecting all three. So the question is, do you view it as if it's connected, and therefore you can do tefillah in the upper 20 sa because it's connected to the middle? And can you do tefillah in the lower sa because it's connected to the middle? Again, the question here is, can we view the middle 40 sa as if it is up, and can we view it as if it is down? So what's the halach in this case? So Gemara quotes a brisa where Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Meir used to say you can view it as if it's up, you can do tefillah in the top one. The Gemara assumes you can do tefillah in the bottom one. So therefore you see that Rabbi Yehuda does hold that the water is viewed as if it is up. So Gemara says we have a brisa where he says that Rabbi Meir holds that way, but Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. So how can you tell me that Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to see from here that Rabbi Yehuda holds this way? He's quoting Rabbi Meir holds that way, but he himself doesn't hold that way. So Gemara responds, Gemara says, okay, if you have a brisa that's clear, there's nothing to discuss. I thought you could learn from it, but you're telling me otherwise, that's fine. Okay, that ends this discussion. The Gemara now refers back to our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, we talked about the different levels of chulin, and we had said there's a machlokes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda if there is a difference between chulin and meiser sheni. Does meiser sheni have a higher level kedusha than chulin itself? So the Gemara now shows that our Mishnah seems to be contradictory on the subject, because the Mishnah lists a number of things that are dependent on the level of kedusha that you have. The first thing on the list was if you have kavana for one, does it work for another? The Gemara there separated chulin and meiser. If you have kavana for chulin, that is, if your tevilah was intended to help you for chulin, doesn't work for meiser. That's clearly the chachamim hold that they're different levels of kedusha. However, later we said that if somebody watches himself and he's careful, that only works for the level that he's watching and not for a higher level. And there it mentioned chulin and meiser together. It didn't mention meiser at all. It just said chulin, then it went to the next level above meiser, which is truma. So that's Rabbi Yehuda, who says there's no differentiation between chulin and truma. So the Gemara first says, okay, so the beginning of the brayso says Rabbi is the chachamim, and the later part is Rabbi Yehuda. That's what the Gemara says at first. Then the Gemara says Rabbi Meir. That is Rabbi Meir. I apologize. That is Rabbi Meir who says that there is no difference between chulin and meiser. Now Rav Acha bar Ada says that I have a different version of this Mishnah where in the latter part we actually do put in the level of meiser. So we have chulin and meiser listed separately, and therefore that would fit with the Rabbanon. Both the beginning and the end of the Mishnah list meiser as a separate level than chulin, and therefore it's the Rabbanon and not Rabbi Yehuda holds that they're the same. Now the Gemara wants to know, what is the halacha of chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh? That is, somebody's handling chulin, but he's voluntarily keeping the halachos of kodesh, of karbanos. Do we give it the actual halachos of karbanos? Do we make it use the standards of the karbanos? If somebody did tefillah for that, does it count for real karbanos? If somebody watched himself for that, do we assume that he's tahar on the level of real karbanos or not? So the Gemara says that Rav Mari said, yes, you see from our Mishnah that somebody who voluntarily keeps the halachos of karbanos at a very high level of kedusha and tahara, and preventing tumah, that works even for real karbanos. You could assume that he successfully achieved that level. How do you see that? The Gemara says very simply. Well, the Gemara is going to have two attempts at where you see that in the Mishnah. The Gemara first wants to say, very simply, the Mishnah does not list chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh as a different level. So obviously it's the same as actual kodesh. Right? The Gemara doesn't list optional keeping of hilchos karbanos, level of karbanos, separately. It just doesn't say it. Therefore we assume that it's included in real karbanos, and therefore you see it's the same halachos. The Gemara says, well, not necessarily. Maybe it's not included in real karbanos. Maybe it's included in chulin. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it doesn't count as anything. Maybe it's included in meiser, which means that it's worth something. It has one level of kedusha, but not all the way up to actual karbanos. Umar shows that there's a Mishnah where we have exactly that machlokes. We have two tanaim. One holds that it is chulin, that's Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, and one holds that it is. There's a Tana Kamal holds that it's meiser, that it's truma. That is the Tanakama holds it's truma, and Rabbi Bar Tzadok holds that it's Tanakama holds that it is chulin, and Rabbi Bar Tzadok holds that it's truma. So those two levels are listed in the Mishnah. Maybe those are the reason that chulin shenas al taras hakodesh is not mentioned is not because it's included in kodesh, but because it's included in chulin according to the Tanakama in this Mishnah. Of course, it's included in truma according to Elazar bar Tzadok. So Gemara says no. So I have a different source from the Mishnah, and that's at the end where it says that Yosi ben Yoezer was a chassid, was a tzaddik of the Kohanim, and still he kept the halacha of tumas medrash on his clothing because he didn't have real karbanos. And Yochanan ben Gudgida would eat everything al taras hakodesh all his days, and still his clothing was considered to be tamei as far as chatas. So you see that his chulin shenas al taras hakodesh did not help for a higher level, which is paradum, which is chatas, which is higher than real karbanos. Implication is that it did help for real karbanos, even though he was only doing pretend. He was only doing chulin shenas al taras hakodesh. Therefore, you have a clear source that they're the same halacha.